During dinner with my son at his mansion in Scottsdale, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Stand up and leave now. Don't say anything to your son." I decided to listen, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. 30 minutes later, police were knocking on their door. "My name is Victor Rodriguez. I'm 70 years old, and I never thought my own family would try to destroy me." The grease under my fingernails told the story of another long day working on my 1967 Mustang. Even after building Rodriguez Auto Group into 12 dealerships across Arizona, I still found peace in my garage, restoring classic cars that reminded me of better times. This particular Mustang was identical to the one Carmen and I drove on our honeymoon back in 1975, when the world seemed full of nothing but possibilities, and our biggest worry was whether we could afford gas for the trip to San Diego. I wiped my hands on the same shop rag I'd used for 30 years, a ritual that connected me to the young Marine who'd returned from Vietnam with nothing but determination and a Purple Heart collecting dust in my dresser drawer. Back then, it was just me, Carmen, and a dream to build something solid in the desert heat of Phoenix, the kind of business where your word meant everything and a handshake sealed deals worth millions. The Marine Corps had taught me discipline, but Carmen taught me how to dream. She'd stand in our first tiny used car lot, pointing at empty spaces and describing where we'd put the customer service center, the parts department, the detail shop. "Victor," she'd say, her eyes bright with possibility, "we're not just selling cars. We're helping families get where they need to go." That first lot became 2, then 5, then 12 dealerships stretching from Phoenix to Tucson. Ford, Chevrolet, Toyota. We carried brands that working people trusted, cars that would start every morning and get folks to their jobs. Carmen insisted on hiring local people, training them right, treating customers with respect whether they bought a new truck or a 10-year-old sedan. The phone's ring cut through my peaceful evening like incoming artillery. After 2 tours in Vietnam, certain sounds still made my muscles tense automatically. I fumbled for it with oil-stained fingers, squinting at the caller ID through my reading glasses. The number made my breath catch in my throat like I'd taken shrapnel to the chest. Danny. My son hadn't called in over a year. Not since our last argument about money, when he'd stormed out after I refused to loan him cash for what he called a guaranteed crypto investment opportunity. Carmen would have handled it better. She always knew exactly what to say when Danny got himself into trouble, which seemed to happen with increasing frequency as he got older. "Hello," my voice came out rougher than intended, carrying the weight of months of silence. "Dad." Danny's voice carried that same uncertain tone from his childhood, like when he'd wrecked his bicycle and wasn't sure how much trouble he was in. "It's me." I set down my wrench and moved to the old leather recliner Carmen had insisted I keep in the garage. "Son, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." The words came out more formal than I'd intended. But a year of silence builds walls between people. I know it's been way too long." He paused, and I could hear him breathing hard on the other end. Too long since we talked like family should. Family. The word hung heavy between us like smoke in still air. We'd been family once, before pride and stubbornness and disappointment built barriers neither of us seemed willing to climb. Before Danny's schemes and my lectures created a gulf that grew wider every time we tried to bridge it. I stared at the framed photo on my workbench. Danny at 16, grinning as he held up the keys to his first car, a used Honda Civic we'd picked out together from our lot. Back then, he'd wanted to learn the business, had talked about taking over someday. That boy seemed like a different person now. "Dad, would you consider coming for dinner tonight? Tiffany's making that pot roast you always loved, and we could talk. Really talk, like we used to." Pot roast. Carmen's recipe, the one she'd perfected over 20 years of Sunday dinners. How did Tiffany know about that? We'd shared maybe 3 meals together in the 5 years since she'd married Danny. "Tonight?" The surprise leaked through my voice despite my attempt to stay neutral. "I know it's short notice, but Tiffany's already started cooking and we just don't want to wait anymore. We've wasted enough time, Dad." Something in his voice tugged at my heart, a vulnerability I remembered from when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms, crawling into bed between Carmen and me until the scary sounds passed. I glanced at the calendar on my garage wall. October 15th, 2024. Carmen's birthday would have been next week. Maybe that's why Danny was reaching out now. Maybe he remembered too. What time? I heard myself asking before my brain had fully decided. 7:30. I'll text you the address. We moved to Scottsdale last year. Scottsdale. Expensive territory, but then Danny had always been ambitious. Sometimes too ambitious for his own good. The boy who'd once been content working summers at our lot, learning to change oil and rotate tires, had developed expensive tastes somewhere along the way. I'll be there, son. Thanks, Dad. Thank you for giving us another chance. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my garage, holding that old photo in my trembling hands. The kid in the picture looked so hopeful, so eager to please. When had that changed? When had my son stopped seeing our family business as something to be proud of and started seeing it as something to escape from? Carmen smiled up at me from another frame on the workbench. Our wedding day, 1974. Both of us young and broke, but absolutely certain we could conquer the world together. She'd been 22, I was 24, fresh out of the Marines with nothing but a purple heart and determination. The shrapnel in my left leg still ached when the weather changed, but Carmen never let me use that as an excuse for anything. Victor Rodriguez, she'd said on our first date, you're going to build something important in this desert. I can see it in your eyes. She'd been right about so many things. Right about starting with used cars instead of new ones because working folks needed reliable transportation they could afford. Right about treating every customer like family, whether they spent $5,000 or $50,000. Right about expanding slowly, one lot at a time, building reputation before building empire. But she'd been wrong about Danny. Or maybe I'd been wrong about Danny. Carmen always believed our son would come around, would eventually appreciate the legacy we were building for him. She died still believing that, still hoping that the boy who'd once loved helping in the shop would rediscover his roots. I made my way upstairs to get ready, past walls covered with photos from better times. Our first dealership grand opening in 1978, Danny's high school graduation, Carmen and me at various charity events over the years. We'd given back to the community that supported us, sponsored Little League teams, funded scholarships, helped military families get reliable transportation when they returned from overseas. The house felt too big without Carmen's voice filling it. 5 bedrooms for a family that never expanded beyond the 3 of us, though not for lack of trying. We'd wanted more children, but after Danny, Carmen couldn't carry another pregnancy to term. 3 miscarriages over 8 years, each one breaking her heart a little more. Maybe that's why she spoiled Danny the way she did. Maybe that's why I never learned to say no to him. I opened my closet and found the navy suit hanging in protective plastic. The fabric felt substantial between my fingers, the same wool blend Carmen had insisted on when she'd surprised me with it for Danny's high school graduation. You need something nice for important occasions, she'd said, smoothing the lapels with those careful hands of hers. And our son graduating is definitely important. The same suit had seen me through business meetings with bank presidents, Chamber of Commerce dinners, and Carmen's funeral. Tonight, it would witness what I hoped would be another milestone. The reconciliation I'd been praying for since our last argument. That argument played in my memory as I showered. Danny had come to me with what he called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, some crypto trading scheme that would supposedly triple his investment in 6 months. He'd needed $200,000 to get started, money he claimed would set him up for life. Dad, you don't understand the digital economy, he'd said, his voice taking on that condescending tone that made my teeth clench. This isn't like your old-fashioned car business. This is the future. The future built on what? I'd asked. Where's the value? Where's the product people actually need? You wouldn't understand. Your generation thinks everything has to be something you can touch and kick the tires on. That had stung. My generation had built everything Danny took for granted. The house he grew up in, the college education that left him with no debt, the safety net that let him chase dreams without worrying about where his next meal would come from. Son, I've seen a lot of get-rich-quick schemes in my day. They all end the same way. This is different. This is legitimate. Tiffany's brother made $2 million last year. Tiffany's brother. A kid who'd never held a real job in his life, who lived off his trust fund and called himself an entrepreneur. The kind of person who looked down on folks like me who built wealth through sweat and smart decisions. Danny, I won't give you money to gamble with, but if you want to learn the car business, really learn it. There's always a place for you. That's when he'd exploded. Called me old-fashioned, stubborn, afraid of progress. Said I was holding him back, keeping him trapped in a dead-end family business when he could be making real money in the modern economy. "You just don't want me to be more successful than you," he'd shouted on his way out the door. Those words had cut deeper than any shrapnel ever had. More successful than me? I'd built something from nothing, employed over 200 people, helped thousands of families get reliable transportation. What had Danny ever built besides debt and disappointment? But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight, Danny had reached out, admitted we'd wasted too much time. Maybe he'd finally learned that shortcuts don't lead anywhere worth going. I selected a bottle of aged whiskey from the cabinet downstairs, a peace offering. Macallan 18, the same brand Carmen and I had shared on our 25th wedding anniversary. She'd taken tiny sips and made faces at the burn, but insisted we finish the bottle because good whiskey shouldn't go to waste, and neither should good marriages. My phone buzzed with Danny's text, 2847 Desert Vista Drive, Scottsdale. "Can't wait to see you, Dad. Desert Vista Drive." I pulled up the address on my phone's map app, a gated community called Pinnacle Ridge, where houses started at $2 million and went up from there. How had Danny afforded something like that? Even successful real estate agents in Scottsdale didn't usually live in neighborhoods like Pinnacle Ridge. I called for an Uber, my fingers hesitating as I typed the address. Scottsdale was 45 minutes away in evening traffic, another world from my modest Phoenix neighborhood where I'd raised Danny after we'd moved out of our original starter home. This neighborhood had character. Working families, retirees who'd earned their rest, young couples just starting out. People who understood that success meant building something lasting, not chasing the next big score. Kids still rode bikes on these streets and neighbors knew each other's names. Standing by my front window, I watched familiar streets settle into evening routines. Mrs. Valdez from next door waved from her porch where she was watering the desert roses Carmen had helped her plant 3 years ago. The Johnsons were grilling in their backyard, probably celebrating their grandson's birthday. Normal people living normal lives built on steady work and solid values. The Uber arrived right on time, a clean sedan driven by a middle-aged guy named Miguel who recognized my address and asked if I was related to the Rodriguez who owned the car dealerships. "That's me," I said, settling into the back seat. "No kidding, you sold my family 3 cars over the years, always treated us fair, never tried to push us into more than we could afford. My daughter's still driving that 2018 Corolla we bought from your Tempe lot." Stories like Miguel's made every long day worth it. We weren't just selling transportation. We were helping families build their lives, get to work, take kids to school, visit relatives on weekends. As we pulled away from the curb and Phoenix gave way to highways, I watched the world transform outside my window. Houses grew larger, lawns more manicured despite the desert climate, driveways wider to accommodate multiple luxury vehicles. By the time we entered Scottsdale, I was staring at mansions that could have housed half the families in my neighborhood. Golf courses stretched between developments, their green fairways a testament to how much water money could buy in the desert. "Scottsdale's something else," Miguel remarked, noting my wide-eyed observation. "Lot of money up here. Different world from where us regular folks live." "I'm visiting my son," I replied, though something about saying it out loud made me uncomfortable. Must be doing well for himself. These houses, man, they're like palaces. Indeed they were. And that's what worried me. Danny had always been a dreamer, always looking for the big score that would set him up for life. But dreams and reality were 2 different things, and I'd learned long ago that sustainable success came from consistent effort, not lucky breaks. The Uber slowed as we approached the gates of Pinnacle Ridge. A security guard checked my ID against a list, made a phone call, then waved us through with the kind of professional courtesy that came with expensive real estate. Inside the community, the houses were even more impressive. Spanish colonial architecture mixed with modern desert contemporary designs, each one sitting on at least an acre of meticulously landscaped property. Private tennis courts, swimming pools that looked like tropical lagoons, 3-car garages that probably cost more than most people's entire homes. Miguel whistled low as we wound through streets named after gemstones and precious metals. "Your boy definitely moved up in the world." "Apparently so," I murmured, though unease was growing in my chest like a tumor. How exactly had Danny managed to afford a house in one of Arizona's most exclusive communities? Real estate commissions were good, but they weren't this good. We turned onto Desert Vista Drive, and the houses somehow got even more impressive. These weren't just homes, they were estates, complete with guest houses and circular driveways designed to accommodate parties for hundreds of people. 2847, Miguel announced, pulling up to a house that belonged in Architectural Digest. "This is it, sir." I sat frozen in the back seat, staring up at stone columns and perfectly manicured desert landscaping that probably required a full-time crew to maintain. A circular driveway curved around a fountain where water danced in the early evening light, an extravagant waste of water in a desert climate. 2 luxury cars sat parked like gleaming statements of success, a white Mercedes S-Class and a black BMW X7, both current model years with temporary tags still visible in the windows. "Beautiful place," Miguel said, but I caught something in his tone. The same thing I was feeling. This was too much, too fast, too perfect. I fumbled with my wallet, hands trembling slightly as I counted out bills and added a generous tip. Miguel had earned it with his honest conversation and safe driving. The car door felt heavier than it should have as I stepped onto pristine pavement that probably cost more per square foot than most people's kitchen counters. "Thank you, Miguel. Drive safe." "You too, Mr. Rodriguez. Hope you have a good evening with your family." Family. That word kept coming back to haunt me. As Miguel's taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood alone on a driveway that could have accommodated a small airplane, staring up at a house that screamed money in a way that made my stomach clench. Before I could even reach for the brass doorbell that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, the massive oak door swung open. A middle-aged Hispanic woman with kind eyes and graying hair stood in the doorway, wearing a crisp black uniform that marked her as professional household staff. Her smile seemed genuine, but something flickered behind her eyes when she looked at me. Concern, warning. The expression vanished so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it, but my Marine training had taught me to trust first impressions. Something about this woman's body language suggested she had things to say but couldn't say them. "Mr. Rodriguez?" she said warmly, stepping aside to usher me into a foyer that made my entire living room look like a closet. "I'm Isabel. Mr. Danny and Miss Tiffany are so excited you're here." The interior took my breath away, but not in a good way. Marble floors stretched toward a curved staircase that belonged in a European palace, not a desert suburb. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over oil paintings that looked original and expensive, the kind of art that appreciated in value while most people's savings depreciated. Fresh flowers filled the air with subtle perfume, but I found myself calculating their cost. Those arrangements were changed weekly, maybe twice weekly. The flowers alone probably cost more than most families spent on groceries. "Dad!" Danny's voice boomed from somewhere deeper in the house, footsteps echoing against marble as he approached. He appeared looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. Expensive suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack, haircut that probably cost $200, teeth so white they practically glowed. When he reached me, his embrace felt desperate, lasting a beat too long, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me that everything was normal. "You look great," he said, stepping back to study me with eyes that seemed both grateful and anxious. "Really great, Dad. I'd looked the same for the past 5 years, a working man in his best suit, showing the wear of 7 decades, but still solid. What had changed was everything around us. This place is incredible, son. Really something special." Tiffany materialized beside Danny like a graceful apparition, her appearance so perfectly orchestrated it felt like a performance. Silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment, makeup applied with professional precision, jewelry that caught the light just so. "Victor." She swept forward to kiss my cheek, enveloping me in perfume that smelled expensive but somehow cold. "You look wonderful. We're so happy you're here." I managed to smile, still overwhelmed by the sheer opulence surrounding us. Everything gleamed, everything matched, everything spoke of money spent without thought or consequence. "How did you manage all this?" I asked, gesturing at the surroundings that belonged in a magazine spread. "Real estate market's been incredible," Danny interrupted quickly, his laugh a little too bright, a little too fast. "Caught some amazing opportunities at exactly the right time. You know how it is, location, timing, luck." Luck. That word always made me nervous when it came to Danny. In my experience, people who attributed their success to luck usually hadn't earned it through honest work. The market's been good to a lot of people, I agreed carefully, though something about his explanation felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced it for other people who might ask uncomfortable questions. Tiffany was already taking my arm with practiced grace, her touch light but somehow insistent. "Come, let's get you settled. Isabel, could you take Mr. Rodriguez's jacket?" I handed over my coat, my best one, though it suddenly felt shabby in these surroundings. Isabel accepted it with another of those kind but troubled smiles, and I noticed her hands shake slightly as she took it. Working in a house like this probably came with pressures I couldn't imagine. "I brought this," I said, offering the whiskey bottle I'd selected so carefully from my own collection. "Thought we could share a drink and catch up properly." Danny's face lit up as he examined the label, but there was something calculated about his enthusiasm. "Dad, this is fantastic. Macallan 18, you really shouldn't have, but I'm glad you did." He clapped my shoulder with the kind of enthusiasm that felt slightly forced, like an actor playing a role. "Tiffany's been cooking all afternoon. She remembered how much you love pot roast." That stopped me cold. How did Tiffany remember my food preferences? We'd shared maybe 3 meals together in the 5 years since she'd married Danny, and pot roast had never come up in conversation. Carmen's pot roast was legendary in our family, but Tiffany had never shown interest in family recipes or traditions. "You're too kind," I told her, meaning it despite my growing confusion. "Family takes care of family," she replied smoothly, the words rolling off her tongue like she'd practiced them. "That's what matters most, isn't it?" The dining room opened before us like something from a period drama, but one where money had been spent without restraint or taste. The mahogany table could have seated 20 people comfortably, set for 4 with china that caught the light from an overhead chandelier that probably cost more than most people's cars. Silver gleamed against white linen so pristine it looked like it had never been used, and the scent of pot roast drifted from what I assumed was a kitchen larger than my entire first floor. "This is beautiful," I breathed, genuinely awed despite my growing discomfort. "We want tonight to be special," Tiffany beamed at the compliment, but her smile had that practiced quality of someone who'd heard similar praise many times before. "We want to start over, Victor. All of us." As Danny pulled out my chair with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to formal dining, I found myself thinking about the last time we'd shared a meal. It had been at Denny's, of all places, after Carmen's funeral. Danny had insisted on paying the $37 check like it was a grand gesture, and we'd sat in uncomfortable silence, picking at pancakes neither of us wanted while trying to figure out how to be a family of 2 instead of 3. Now here we were in a dining room that could have been featured in Architectural Digest, with place settings that probably cost more than that entire funeral meal. The contrast felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier's warm light, casting tiny rainbows across starched white linens that had been ironed to perfection. Each place setting looked like artwork. Multiple forks arranged with military precision, cloth napkins folded into perfect peaks, water glasses positioned exactly 2 inches from the wine glasses. "Only the best for family reunions, right, Dad?" Danny beamed as he ensured my chair was positioned correctly at the head of the table. Tiffany settled gracefully to my left, while Danny claimed the seat to my right. The arrangement felt deliberate, both of them positioned where they could watch my every reaction, guide every conversation. In the Marines, we called this flanking maneuvers. Isabel appeared silently from the kitchen, carrying delicate appetizers arranged like tiny sculptures on bone china plates. Her movements were efficient but nervous, and I noticed she avoided making eye contact with any of us. Whatever was going on in this house, she knew about it and didn't approve. "Let's start with your whiskey," Danny announced, already moving toward the bottle I'd brought. He opened it with the confidence of someone who knew good liquor, pouring generous portions into heavy crystal tumblers that felt substantial in my hands. "This calls for a proper toast," he said, handing me a glass filled higher than I would have poured for myself. The amber liquid caught the light beautifully, but something about Danny's eagerness to get me drinking made my old combat instincts prickle. The whiskey's warmth spread through my chest as Tiffany raised her wine glass with theatrical grace. Everything about her movements seemed choreographed, like she'd rehearsed this entire evening. "To family," she said, her smile radiant but somehow cold. "To forgiveness and fresh starts." "To Carmen," Danny added, his voice catching slightly in what seemed like genuine emotion. She would have wanted us together like this. The whiskey burned sweetly as we drank, but I found myself thinking about how Carmen had always been suspicious of people who tried too hard to impress. "Victor," she used to say, "when someone's working that hard to convince you they're successful, they're usually trying to convince themselves too." "Tell us about the dealerships." Tiffany leaned forward with what seemed like genuine interest, but her questions felt too specific, too focused. "Danny says you built an empire from nothing. That must have taken incredible business sense." "Empire's too grand a word," I replied, taking another sip and feeling unusually relaxed. Maybe it was the relief of reconciliation, or maybe it was just good whiskey on an empty stomach, just hard work and treating people right. Carmen always said, "Treat employees like family, customers like friends, and success will follow." "Don't be modest, Dad." Danny refilled my glass before I noticed it had emptied, his movements smooth and practiced. 12 locations across Arizona. Annual revenue in the tens of millions. That's impressive by any standard. Tens of millions. How did he know our revenue figures? Those numbers weren't public information, and I'd certainly never discussed them with him. In fact, during our last argument, he'd accused me of being secretive about the business finances. Isabel served the soup course with the same nervous efficiency I'd noticed earlier. Rich lobster bisque in delicate porcelain bowls, each serving garnished with a precise drizzle of cream and a few perfectly placed herbs. This wasn't home cooking. This was restaurant-quality presentation that required professional skills. "Do you ever think about retirement?" Tiffany asked casually, cutting her bread with surgical precision. "Slowing down a bit, enjoying the fruits of your labor?" The question felt loaded, like she'd been building up to it. I found myself drinking more freely than usual, the combination of good company and excellent whiskey loosening inhibitions I'd maintained for months of solitude. "The dealerships keep me busy." "It's what Carmen and I built together," I said, surprised by how emotional my voice sounded. "Every location has her fingerprints on it. Her ideas about customer service, employee treatment, community involvement." Danny and Tiffany exchanged a glance so quick I almost missed it, but my military training had taught me to notice subtle communications between people. They were coordinating something, planning something. "But you can't work forever," Danny pressed gently, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he'd used as a teenager when he wanted something. "Have you thought about succession planning, legal arrangements for the future? What happens to everything you and Mom built if something happens to you?" The question felt oddly specific, almost clinical. Why were they so interested in my business plans? And why tonight, during what was supposed to be a reconciliation dinner? Isabel appeared with the main course, and I had to admit the presentation was flawless. Pot roast that looked and smelled exactly like Carmen's recipe, complete with the roasted vegetables arranged just the way my wife used to do it. The carrots were cut to the same size, the potatoes had that perfect golden brown color, even the gravy had the right consistency. "This is perfect," I told Tiffany truthfully, though something nagged at me. Exactly like my wife used to make. Tiffany's smile looked painted on, but her voice carried what seemed like genuine warmth. "I wanted tonight to be special, to remind you that family takes care of family. I may not have known Carmen well, but I could see how much she meant to you and Danny." As we ate, Danny regaled me with stories about his real estate ventures, though his explanations remained frustratingly vague. Market timing, strategic partnerships, exclusive opportunities, buzzwords that sounded impressive but didn't actually explain how a man who'd asked me for $200,000 18 months ago could now afford a $3 million house. Tiffany asked pointed questions about dealership operations, profit margins, property values. Her curiosity felt intense, almost professional. How many employees did we have? What was our debt-to-asset ratio? Had I considered consolidating properties to maximize efficiency? These weren't casual dinner conversation topics. These were the kinds of questions business brokers asked when evaluating companies for acquisition. The room grew warmer as evening progressed, or maybe it was just the whiskey affecting me more than usual. My head felt lighter than it should have after just 2 glasses, but then again, I'd been eating less since Carmen died, and alcohol hit harder on an empty stomach. Danny checked his watch when he thought I wasn't looking, a nervous habit from childhood that used to drive Carmen crazy. Tiffany monitored my consumption like a bartender tracking a regular customer, always ready with another pour before my glass emptied completely. Something nagged at the edge of my consciousness, but the whiskey made thinking difficult. Everything felt slightly surreal, like watching myself from outside my body. The conversation flowed around me like water, but I found myself struggling to focus on the details. "Dad, you mentioned earlier about Carmen's influence on the business," Danny said, leaning forward with what seemed like genuine interest. "What would she think about expansion opportunities? New markets? Maybe franchising the Rodriguez Auto Group brand?" Franchising. Another business term that felt out of place in a family dinner conversation. Why was my son suddenly so interested in the mechanics of business growth when he'd shown nothing but disdain for the car business his entire adult life? "Your mother was always cautious about expansion," I replied, my words feeling slightly thick in my mouth. "She believed in growing organically, making sure each location was solid before adding another." "But that was a different era," Tiffany interjected smoothly. "Today's market moves faster. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to stay competitive." Calculated risks. Carmen had always been suspicious of people who used phrases like that. "Victor," she used to say, "when someone starts talking about calculated risks with your money, hold on to your wallet and run." I was reaching into my jacket pocket for my phone to check the time when it vibrated against my palm. The vibration startled me mid-sentence as I was telling them about our expansion into Tucson. "Sorry," I mumbled, glancing apologetically at Danny and Tiffany. Probably just the night manager with some routine question. But the number on my screen belonged to no one I recognized. A local area code, but completely foreign digits. None of my managers used personal phones to contact me about business issues. The phone buzzed again, more insistently this time, like whoever was calling had something urgent to communicate. "Everything all right?" Danny asked, leaning forward with what seemed like excessive concern for a simple phone call. "Just an unfamiliar number," I replied, shielding the screen partially with my napkin. Something about their sudden attention made me instinctively protective of my privacy. The text message appeared in stark capital letters. "Stand up and leave now. Say nothing to your son." My blood turned cold. The elegant dining room suddenly felt like it was tilting, though I couldn't tell if that was shock or the whiskey making my head swim. The expensive crystal, the perfect place settings, the orchestrated conversation, everything took on a sinister quality. I read the message again, certain I'd misunderstood. Same words, same urgent command from someone who knew where I was and felt compelled to warn me about something. "Dad." Tiffany's voice seemed to come from far away, though she was sitting right next to me. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I forced my features into what I hoped resembled normalcy, slipping the phone back into my pocket with hands that trembled more than they should. The simple act of concealing the message felt like the most important thing I'd ever done. "Fine," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange even to my ears. Just rich food hitting me harder than expected. But I wasn't fine. Someone unknown had my private number, knew exactly where I was, and felt compelled to warn me about immediate danger. About Danny? About this perfect evening that was suddenly feeling like an elaborate trap. When had I become this dizzy? 2 glasses of whiskey shouldn't affect me this strongly, not with a full meal. I'd been drinking whiskey for 40 years, knew my limits, knew how alcohol affected me. Something was definitely wrong. The whiskey glass in my hand caught the chandelier light, amber liquid swirling as my fingers shook imperceptibly. Carmen always said I had a hollow leg when it came to drinking. It took a lot more than 2 glasses to make me feel this disoriented. "Maybe some water," Tiffany suggested smoothly, already signaling toward the kitchen where Isabel had disappeared. Sometimes rich food can make alcohol hit harder than expected. "You sure you're okay?" Danny studied my face with sharp attention, and for the first time all evening, his concern seemed genuine rather than performative. "You went completely white there for a second." "I'm sure," I lied, the words coming easier than they should have. "Just need to excuse myself for a moment." "Bathroom?" Danny pointed toward the hallway with what seemed like relief. "Second door on the left. We'll wait for you." I stood carefully, testing my balance. The room swayed slightly, but I managed to walk normally toward the hallway, acutely aware that both Danny and Tiffany were watching my every step. Behind me, their voices continued in low, concerned tones, but the words seemed to float past my ears without registering. The hallway stretched before me, lined with expensive artwork and subtle lighting that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Second door on the left led to what I assumed was a powder room, but instead of turning left, something made me continue straight toward what looked like a kitchen entrance. The anonymous message burned in my memory like a brand. Whoever sent it knew something I didn't, something important enough to risk exposure by warning a complete stranger. My Marine training kicked in. When someone gives you intelligence about danger, you listen first and ask questions later. The kitchen was enormous, designed for entertaining on a grand scale. Professional-grade appliances, marble countertops that stretched for miles, and enough storage space to feed a small army. Isabel stood at a sink large enough to wash car parts, methodically cleaning crystal glasses with the kind of careful attention that suggested expensive replacements. She didn't acknowledge my presence, even though my footsteps must have been audible on the marble floors. She continued her work as if I were invisible, but I noticed her shoulders tense slightly as I approached. The kitchen's back door stood just beyond her, leading to what looked like a garden illuminated by strategically placed landscape lighting. Freedom, fresh air, space to think clearly away from Danny and Tiffany's watchful eyes and whatever they'd put in my whiskey. I moved quietly past Isabel, expecting her to turn, to question my presence, to alert my host that their guest was wandering where he shouldn't be. She never looked up from her washing, though her shoulders tensed even more as I passed. If anything, she seemed to be deliberately ignoring my escape. The door opened silently onto a manicured lawn that could have belonged to a country club. Motion sensors illuminated my path across perfectly trimmed grass toward a gate in the property's back fence. My dress shoes slipped slightly on the dewy grass, but I didn't care about stains or appearances anymore. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, carrying its mysterious warning like a ticking bomb. The evening air was cool against my flushed face, helping to clear some of the fog from my brain. Whatever they'd given me was wearing off now that I was away from the source. The gate opened onto a quiet residential street lined with mansions that probably housed millionaires and their secrets. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers, opened my ride-sharing app, and requested pickup 1 block away from Danny's address. 5 minutes until arrival. 5 minutes to decide whether I was being paranoid or protecting myself from something real. But the anonymous message, the unusual dizziness, the pointed questions about my business, it all added up to something that made my combat instincts scream danger. The phone in my hand felt like evidence of conspiracy or salvation. I couldn't tell which. But that message, those urgent capital letters, had triggered every survival instinct the Marine Corps had ever taught me. When someone warns you about danger, Margaret used to say, listen first and ask questions later. The Uber's headlights appeared at the end of the block, cutting through suburban darkness like a lifeline. I climbed into the back seat, gave the driver my Phoenix address, and immediately dialed the number that had shattered my evening. It rang twice before a voice answered. Careful, anonymous, deliberately neutral, but unmistakably female. I hoped you would call this number. Who is this? My voice came out rougher than intended, the whiskey and adrenaline making my throat tight. Why did you warn me? I cannot reveal myself, but you were in immediate danger tonight. That's impossible. I was having dinner with my son. Even as I said it, I knew how naive it sounded. A pause that stretched too long, filled with the sound of Phoenix traffic flowing past the Uber's windows. Then, your son owes $4.2 million to people who break bones when payment is late. The Uber driver glanced in his rearview mirror as we merged into traffic, probably wondering why his passenger had gone completely silent mid-conversation. That's impossible, I repeated, though my voice lacked conviction. The mansion, the cars, the lifestyle that couldn't be sustained on real estate commissions, it was all starting to make terrible sense. He borrowed against everything to fund gambling debts, online sports betting, crypto trading, high-stakes poker games with people who don't accept IOUs. The loan sharks gave him 2 days to pay or face serious physical consequences. 2 days. Not the 8 days I'd misheard earlier. 2 days to come up with $4.2 million. Or watch his son disappear into the kind of violence that left families planning funerals instead of reconciliations. My free hand found the door handle instinctively, as if I could escape this information by fleeing the moving car. Through the window, expensive Scottsdale neighborhoods blurred past. perfect lawns hiding imperfect secrets. Each mansion we passed could have been concealing similar betrayals, similar desperate schemes hatched by people who'd confused wealth with worth. Even if that were true, I said slowly, my mind still struggling to process the magnitude of what I was hearing, what does it have to do with warning me away from dinner? The whiskey you brought contained a sedative called midazolam. It multiplies alcohol effects by a factor of 5, making you extremely susceptible to suggestion and causing short-term memory problems. The words hit like a physical blow. The unusual dizziness, the way 2 glasses had affected me like 10, my increasing willingness to discuss business details I'd normally keep private. My own whiskey, my peace offering, turned into a weapon against me. Legal documents were prepared in advance, the voice continued relentlessly, each word driving the knife deeper. Complete transfer of your dealership properties and business assets. Power of attorney granting your son full control over all financial decisions. The only missing element was your signature. I thought about Danny's nervous energy throughout dinner, Tiffany's rehearsed warmth, their pointed questions about succession planning and retirement. The evening replayed in my memory with horrifying new context. Every toast, every refilled glass, every strategic touch designed to lower my guard and cloud my judgment. I stopped, remembering Rick's eager insistence on opening my gift immediately, Emma's careful monitoring of my consumption, their coordinated refilling of my glass before I'd noticed it emptying. "How do you know all this?" I asked finally, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you escaped before signing anything." Midazolam combined with alcohol can cause complete memory gaps, making it easy to claim you willingly transferred everything while in a clear state of mind. The anonymous caller knew details no stranger should possess: drug names, legal document specifics, the exact nature of Danny's financial crisis. Someone with intimate access to the conspiracy. "The loan sharks gave him 2 days," the voice continued. "That deadline is tomorrow night." 2 days. Less than 48 hours to come up with $4.2 million or watch my son face consequences that didn't bear thinking about. But he'd been willing to drug his own father, steal everything his parents had built, destroy a lifetime of work to save himself from the consequences of his own choices. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "Because what they planned was wrong. Because you deserve to know the truth about people you trust. Because I've watched them plan this for weeks, and I couldn't stand by while they destroyed a good man for their greed." Isabel. The realization hit me like lightning striking twice in the same place. Her nervous efficiency during dinner, the way she'd avoided eye contact, her deliberate non-reaction when I'd passed through the kitchen. She'd known about the plan and chosen conscience over employment security. "You're Isabel," I said quietly. A long pause. Then, "I am someone who sees more than people realize. Someone who couldn't watch them hurt you." "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. "Don't thank me yet. They'll realize you're gone soon. Your son is desperate enough to try again, possibly with more dangerous methods." As if summoned by her words, my phone showed 3 missed calls from Danny's number. The bathroom excuse would only work for so long before they realized I'd fled deliberately. What should I do? Protect yourself immediately. Change your locks tonight. Call your lawyers first thing in the morning. Move financial assets to accounts your son can't access. He knows your business inside and out, every vulnerability, every routine, every weakness. The Uber driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Sir, we're about halfway to Phoenix. You doing all right back there?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Through the phone, I could hear Isabel breathing steadily, waiting for my next question. "Will you testify if this goes to court?" "I can't. My immigration status is complicated. But the truth has a way of surfacing when people dig deep enough. The documents exist. The drug can be tested for. Your son's gambling debts are real and documented." 3 more missed calls appeared on my screen. Danny's panic would be growing as bathroom minutes stretched into an obvious absence. Soon he'd realize I'd escaped deliberately, and desperation would make him even more dangerous. "Be very careful," Isabel warned. "Desperate people make desperate choices. Your son has less than 48 hours to find $4.2 million, or face consequences worse than bankruptcy." Men have killed family members for much less. The call ended, leaving me alone with the weight of complete family destruction. In one evening, I'd gained a son and lost him again, learned the price of trust and the cost of naivety. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Dad, where are you? We're worried sick. Please come back." I stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. The man who'd sent those words had planned to drug me unconscious and steal everything Carmen and I had built together. The boy I'd raised, taught to drive, helped with homework, supported through college, that boy was gone, replaced by a stranger desperate enough to destroy his own father. The Uber driver cleared his throat gently. "Sir, we're approaching downtown Phoenix. Still want to go to the original address?" I looked out at the city lights reflecting off the desert mountains, then back at my phone showing the route to Scottsdale still available in my GPS. Safety lay ahead in Phoenix, in my modest house where Carmen's memory lived in every room. But confrontation waited behind in Scottsdale, where my son was probably searching through the house, realizing his plan had failed. For the first time in my life, I had to choose between protecting myself and protecting what remained of my family. I pulled Carmen's wedding photo from my wallet, edges soft from years of handling, her smile as radiant as the day we'd promised to build something meaningful together. She'd been photographed laughing at something I'd whispered in her ear during our reception, her face glowing with joy and absolute trust in our future. "She wouldn't run," I whispered to her image. Carmen had never backed down from difficult conversations, never chosen comfort over doing what was right. When our first dealership was struggling and competitors were spreading rumors about our credit, she'd marched into every bank in Phoenix until she found one willing to give us a fair hearing. "Everything all right back there, sir?" the driver asked, probably noticing my emotional state in the rearview mirror. "Actually, no." I straightened in my seat, decision crystallizing like steel cooling in my chest. "I need to make a phone call. Then we're changing destination." My fingers shook as I dialed 911. But my voice was steady when the dispatcher answered. 2 rings, then a professional voice that reminded me of military communications. 911 Emergency Services. "What's your emergency?" "My family is attempting to drug me for money. I have evidence and they're still at the location with prepared legal documents." The words sounded surreal, spoken aloud, like lines from a television drama, but they were my reality now. "Sir, are you in immediate danger?" "Not right now. But I need officers at 2847 Desert Vista Drive, Scottsdale. I'm returning there to gather evidence before they can destroy it." The dispatcher's questions came rapid fire. Nature of the drugging, number of suspects, weapons present. I answered, methodically, my business training taking over. Clear facts, specific details, actionable information. Officers are en route. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. "Sir, I strongly advise you not to return to that location until law enforcement secures the scene. I understand the risk, but if I don't go back, they'll destroy evidence and try this again with someone else. My son is desperate, and desperate people don't just give up." After disconnecting, I leaned forward toward the driver. "Change of plans. We're going back to Scottsdale." "Sir, you seem really upset. Maybe you should think about this decision. This isn't a rash decision." I met his eyes in the mirror, and he must have seen something there that convinced him I knew what I was doing. Sometimes you have to choose between being safe and doing what's right. Miguel, I remembered his name now, studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "You're the boss. But if things get dangerous, we call the police. They're already coming." The return journey felt different from our earlier drive. Streetlights illuminated determination instead of confusion, purpose instead of hurt. Each mile brought me closer to confronting the son I'd raised, the family I'd trusted, the future I'd have to rebuild from scratch. But it also brought me closer to justice. Carmen's voice seemed to whisper from the photograph in my hands. Family means telling the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. 20 minutes later, we turned onto Desert Vista Drive. Police cars were approaching from the opposite direction, lights off but unmistakably official. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this was really happening. I was about to destroy my family to save myself and possibly others. "Want me to wait around the corner?" Miguel asked, pulling up across the street from Danny's mansion. "That would be helpful. This might take a while." Walking up the curved driveway felt like approaching an execution, but I forced myself to move with the confidence of a man who belonged there. The mansion's perfect exterior concealed such calculated evil, such desperate betrayal that it made my stomach turn. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorbell, but I pressed it firmly. Time to face my son. The doorbell's chimes echoed through the mansion like a death knell. Footsteps approached quickly, too quickly for casual concern, confirming that they'd already discovered my absence and were probably searching the house. Danny yanked the door open, relief and suspicion warring across his features like competing armies. His expensive suit was wrinkled now, his perfect hair mussed from running his hands through it. "Dad, where have you been?" His smile looked painted on with cheap paint that was already cracking. "We were getting worried sick. We thought something terrible had happened." "Sorry, son." I forced my voice into apologetic tones, calling upon every acting skill I'd never known I possessed. I needed some fresh air, felt dizzy after all that rich food and good whiskey. "Dizzy?" His eyes sharpened like a predator sensing weakness. "You were gone for almost 45 minutes. Tiffany thought you might have collapsed somewhere. Time got away from me. Beautiful neighborhood you have here." I walked further than I intended, got a little lost. Tiffany appeared behind Danny, her designer dress wrinkled from nervous pacing, her perfect makeup showing stress cracks around her eyes. Her carefully constructed hostess mask slipped for just a moment, revealing raw panic underneath. "Victor, you gave us such a scare." She reached for my arm with fingers that trembled slightly, her touch more desperate than welcoming. "Are you feeling better now? You looked so pale when you left." "Much better, thank you." I allowed her to guide me back inside, noting how her grip lingered too long, too tight, like she was afraid I might bolt again, just needed to clear my head. The foyer felt smaller now, oppressive rather than impressive. Every expensive detail reminded me of the blood money that had purchased this illusion of success, this stage set for family destruction. "Perhaps you had too much wine with dinner." Tiffany's laugh sounded brittle, like crystal about to shatter. "Let's get you some water and maybe you should sit down again." "Actually, I think I'd like to sit down," I agreed, moving deliberately toward the dining room, "if that's all right with you both." Danny and Tiffany exchanged a glance laden with meaning I was supposed to miss, but their coordination felt less smooth now, more desperate. Their perfect performance was cracking under pressure. "Of course, Dad, whatever you need." The dining room had been hastily reorganized during my absence. Papers that might have been scattered across the table were nowhere to be seen, and I noticed a manila folder peeking out from beneath a decorative runner on the sideboard. Isabel moved efficiently between kitchen and dining room, but her nervous energy was more pronounced than before, like someone waiting for an explosion. I settled back into my chair at the head of the table, noting how Danny and Tiffany flanked me exactly as before. The crystal glasses had been cleared, the dinner plates stacked, but the atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension that made the air feel electric. "So, Dad," Danny said, his voice carrying forced brightness, "feeling completely recovered now? No more dizziness or confusion? Clear as a bell, son." I smiled blandly, wondering what evidence they'd hidden while I was gone. That fresh air worked wonders. Danny drummed his fingers against the mahogany table, a nervous habit from childhood that betrayed his anxiety now. The confident businessman facade was slipping, revealing the frightened boy underneath. "Well," he said with enthusiasm that sounded increasingly hollow, "since you're feeling better, maybe we could continue our evening." I know Tiffany was looking forward to more conversation about the business. Tiffany nodded eagerly, but her smile looked painted on with shaking hands. "We have so much catching up to do, and I was hoping you might consider some of the expansion ideas we discussed earlier." Danny stood suddenly and moved toward the liquor cabinet with movements that seemed too fast, too jerky. "Dad, let's have one more toast before the evening ends. That whiskey was too good not to finish properly. My whiskey." The bottle I'd brought as a peace offering now turned into evidence of attempted poisoning. I watched Danny's hands tremble almost imperceptibly as he measured fresh portions into crystal tumblers, noting how he lingered over my glass, adding liquid that caught the light differently than the amber spirits. "You know," I began casually, settling back in my chair with my hands folded peacefully, "I want to tell you about the day you were born, Danny." His shoulders tensed slightly and his grip tightened on the whiskey bottle. "Dad, that's sweet, but maybe we should toast first. This whiskey really is exceptional. This is important, son. Your mother was in labor for 14 hours, longest day and night of my life. Tiffany leaned forward with forced enthusiasm that couldn't mask her growing panic. Victor, the whiskey will lose its flavor if we wait too long. Can't we drink and listen at the same time? Patience, dear. Some stories can't be rushed. I watched Danny carry the glasses toward our table, noting the slight sediment swirling in mine when it caught the chandelier light. Where was I? Oh yes, Carmen was convinced something was wrong because labor was taking so long. Danny set my glass down carefully, ensuring I could see the generous portion he'd poured. His own glass contained significantly less, crystal clear, without any unusual particles floating in the amber liquid. The doctor kept assuring us everything was normal, I continued, lifting my glass as if to examine the whiskey's color. But your mother had instincts about these things. She always knew when something wasn't quite right. Fascinating, Tiffany interrupted, her smile growing strained and artificial. But surely that toast is getting warm. Family stories are so much better with good whiskey. I swirled my glass gently, watching foreign particles dance in the amber liquid like tiny lies suspended in beautiful truth. You're absolutely right about savoring good whiskey, I agreed, bringing the glass closer to my lips without actually drinking. Carmen always said patience makes everything taste better. Danny's eye twitched, and sweat was beginning to show at his hairline despite the air conditioning. Dad, you've been talking for 15 minutes. The whiskey really is getting warm. Time flies when you're sharing memories. I gestured expansively with my glass, using the motion to avoid actually drinking while keeping up the pretense. Did I mention how tiny you were? Just 6 pounds, but you had the strongest grip I'd ever felt. Tiffany stood abruptly and moved behind my chair, her hands settling on my shoulders, with practiced intimacy that now felt calculated and cold. Victor, you're such a wonderful storyteller. Why don't we toast to Danny's birth? Then you can continue with all the details. Her fingers pressed against my shoulders with increasing insistence, and I could feel her desperation through her touch. The plan was falling apart before their eyes, and they knew it. Your mother said you'd be stubborn from day one, I continued, pretending not to notice Tiffany's pressure or Danny's growing agitation. She was right, wasn't she? Once you set your mind on something, nothing could stop you. Dad, please. Danny's composure cracked slightly, his voice taking on a pleading quality. Just one sip, then tell us about Mom. The thing about stubbornness, I mused, still holding my untouched glass, is that it can be a virtue or a vice. Carmen always worried about which way you'd choose. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of Isabel washing dishes in the kitchen and the distant hum of expensive air conditioning. Danny and Tiffany stared at me with barely concealed frustration, their perfect plan unraveling with each passing minute. I think, I said slowly, setting down my glass without drinking, Carmen would be heartbroken to see what choices you've made. Danny's face went white as desert sand. What do you mean by that? Before I could answer, 3 sharp knocks echoed from the front door, authoritative and unmistakable. Police, open the door.